On November 14th, the FAA dropped the follow-up directive many of us suspected might be coming, but not nearly this fast and not at this scale. With emergency AD 20252353, the agency didn't just refine the earlier grounding of the MD-11. It expanded it to include the entire DC-10 and MD-10 family. That means every remaining U.S. aircraft built on the classic DC-10 airframe is now prohibited from further flight until operators complete FAA-approved inspections and any required corrective actions. So, what's changed since the first grounding? And why did regulators feel they had to widen the scope so dramatically? Let's take a look. For those who have been following our earlier coverage, you already know the background. We talked about the event that triggered the first emergency directive, and then we walked through AD 20252351, which grounded the MD-11 and MD-11F. This new directive, 20252353, doesn't replace the story we covered before, it simply expands it, and that expansion is sweeping. In the FAA's own words, this updated AD applies to a long list of aircraft: MD-11, MD-11F, MD-10, 10F, MD-10, 30F, DC-1010, DC-1010F, DC-1015, DC-1030, DC-1030F, DC-1040, and DC-1040F. If it's part of the DC-10, MD-10, MD-11 design family, it's included. The directive even lists tanker variants, including the KC-10A and the KDC-10, though many of those military airframes have already been retired. Unlike the first AD, this expansion does not ask operators to reevaluate what happened in the recent MD-11 accident. The FAA already made its determination. An unsafe condition exists, and that condition is likely to exist or develop in other products of the same type design. That line is the core rationale behind this entire expansion. Regulators concluded that the structural similarity is significant enough that they cannot treat the MD-11 as an isolated case. The FAA directs operators to do one thing immediately: stop flying these airplanes. Further flight is prohibited until each aircraft completes the inspections and any corrective actions defined in a method approved by the manager of the FAA's Air 520 division. That's the exact compliance language. The earlier MD-11 directive is no longer the controlling document. 20252353 now replaces and governs everything. The agency also notes that this emergency action is interim. That means the FAA expects more information to come from the ongoing investigation and more regulation may follow. But regulators aren't waiting for final conclusions. Because the underlying cause is still under investigation, and because the unsafe condition demonstrated on the MD-11 could reasonably appear on related models, the FAA made the decision to expand the grounding first and refine the details later. The biggest question operators have asked since November 14th is simple: why expand the AD to so many older aircraft? To understand that, we need to look at the structural relationships between these models, not go back through the accident itself, because we've already covered that, but focus on the design lineage. The DC-10 was the original wide-body trijet from McDonnell Douglas. When the MD-11 was developed later, the aircraft changed significantly in terms of length, avionics, aerodynamics, and performance. But structurally, several major load-bearing systems remained connected to the original design philosophy. One of those systems is the engine pylon assembly and the way that assembly connects to the wing. The FAA states in the AD that the engine to pylon and pylon to wing structure on the MD-11 is similar in design to the equivalent structures on the MD-10 and DC-10. That similarity is the key. The unsafe condition described in the AD, a detachment of the engine and pylon during takeoff, cannot be dismissed as a one-off event if the same structural architecture exists in previous models. This doesn't mean the FAA is saying the DC-10 or MD-10 is faulty. The directive is careful in its wording. The cause of the detachment is under investigation. Nothing in the AD identifies the root cause or blames a specific part, material, or design feature. But the agency is obligated to take preventive action when multiple designs share a structural system that could, under certain conditions, display the same vulnerability. The AD emphasizes this by stating that the unsafe condition is likely to exist or develop on the DC-10 MD-10 models as well. In practical terms, this means the FAA isn't speculating about what failed internally. They are closing the door on further flights until they are certain that no aircraft with the shared design could exhibit the same catastrophic failure mode. This is not about concluding a design flaw exists. It's about eliminating risk until the investigation clarifies what truly happened on the MD-11, and until approved inspection procedures confirm that each affected aircraft is safe to operate. This regulatory posture is also consistent with what the FAA has done historically. When a critical structural or load-bearing component shows signs of potential vulnerability, especially one with past precedent in earlier models, the FAA issues emergency directives first and refines the engineering guidance as more facts become available. We saw this after American Airlines Flight 191 in 1979, when the FAA grounded the DC-10 until its pylon mount issues were fully understood. The agency operates under the principle that structural uncertainty demands immediate mitigation. Viewed in that context, AD 2025-2353 is not surprising. It's decisive, broad, and protective by design. And from the FAA's perspective, expanding the AD to the entire DC-10 family is the only responsible move while the investigation continues. The expanded grounding leaves operators of the DC-10 and MD-10 in a holding pattern. These aircraft serve in specialized roles, especially aerial firefighting and certain cargo operations, so pulling them out of service isn't easy. But under the new directive, none of them can fly until they complete inspections and any corrective actions laid out in an FAA-approved method. The AD doesn't describe the steps itself. Operators must wait for the official compliance procedure and follow it exactly once it's released. Movement of grounded aircraft is also restricted. Even short ferry flights will require an alternate method of compliance, meaning operators may have to keep aircraft parked where they were when the directive took effect. For firefighting agencies, this could create real capacity challenges, since the DC-10 tankers are among the few aircraft capable of delivering such large drops. The financial impact is unavoidable. Deep structural inspections on older wide-bodies are costly, and if repairs are needed inside the pylon assembly, some operators may face difficult decisions about whether returning these aircraft to service is still viable. Insurance providers will likely review their exposure as well, which can add another layer of pressure. Until the FAA publishes the approved inspection method and operators complete it, every affected aircraft will remain on the ground. At this stage, the next steps hinge on two parallel efforts: the ongoing investigation and the FAA's development of an approved inspection method. Once investigators determine what actually caused the pylon separation, the FAA will decide whether this emergency directive needs to be updated, expanded, or followed by a long-term modification order. Because this grounding is classified as an interim action, more detailed requirements are expected as soon as the investigation clarifies which parts of the pylon structure need closer scrutiny. That could mean a focused inspection on specific components, or, depending on the findings, broader reinforcement or redesign. For operators, the path forward is straightforward but demanding. No aircraft in the DC-10 or MD-10 family will return to service until it passes the inspections and corrective actions laid out in the FAA-approved compliance method. And for a fleet as old and historically important as the DC-10, the outcome of this process may ultimately shape whether these aircraft continue flying or close out their operational careers here. We'll keep you updated as soon as new details emerge, so don't forget to subscribe.